Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Very special guest with us here today. From my high school, we have Ben Hodges. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you.
Ben has been truly a prolific debater, I would say, in PF. Uh, got to finals of NSDA his junior year, then went back to champion the entire tournament in his senior year. Has also done very well at lots of other tournaments, was a two times North Carolina state champion, got 11 gold bids in PF, including winning the Yale tournament, Duke, Princeton, the King round robin, and got to semis at TOC in 2023. He's now coaching at Durham Academy. So very happy to have you on the channel, Ben, to dispense some of your wisdom.
I'm very happy to have me on.
So, first few questions are just about your experience with debate in general. I guess we'll start at the sort of origin story. How did you get into
Yeah.
PF in the first place?
Yeah. I was never much of a person for public speaking. I kind of still am not. It's gotten easier, obviously, because I've done it for 3 years now. But I joined the public forum team at Durham Academy in my sophomore year. I had a friend, Michael Hansen. A lot of you probably have also heard of Michael Hansen. Also, I would say a very prolific debater. He was on the team and he kind of convinced me to just give it a shot. I didn't want to, but I was like, it's fine. My best friend wants me to do this. I'll try and join the team. Didn't do very well at my first tournament. I lost every round. That was not a fun time, but I kind of from there just put a lot of time, put a lot of hard work into it, and obviously I was able to get some good results over the next 3 years.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people who lose all of the rounds of their first tournament struggle to find the motivation to come back. Um,
Yeah,
I guess I understand your motivation for coming in the first place. What was your motivation for coming back? Like, what was the resilience?
yeah. I mean, I just couldn't let myself end on such a bad note. Like I had tried my hand at a lot of different things throughout the years, be it cross country. I did some fencing for a while. I did competitive Rubik's Cube solving. So I did kind of literally everything. And I was never that good at any of it. So I was like, all right, this time I can't just like give up again after like not winning a single round. And I just like I wanted to kind of, as a testament to my own hard work, I wanted to just be like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try my very hardest and I'm going to see if it works. I'm not going to give up this time. And it obviously started working after a little while. So that's probably why I stuck with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like for some people, debate is the most interesting activity because of how difficult it is. Like
Yeah.
it's not one of those things you can just sort of, I feel like, pick up super easily, at least for most people on
Yeah, I
like
agree.
day one. So I want to ask about your process of like getting into it then. You say that you've
Yeah.
invested a bunch of time right after that first tournament to like try to work harder and get better. What did that look like? What was your process of learning?
Yeah. There was a lot of parts to it. Like I kind of just started like basically just like inundating myself with as much debate as physically possible. I would go to all the practices my school had, watch more experienced debaters debate. I'd go on PF videos a lot and just kind of like comb through tons of old PF videos and kind of just like soak in all of those like different things that people were doing. And I mean that will only get you so far. You can't like become amazing at debate just by watching it. You obviously have to be doing it and getting those reps in. So I also would just kind of on my own time, I would redo speeches from rounds that didn't go my way. I would just keep doing more and more research. Like initially, you kind of do that first layer of research where you have all your basic evidence. I would kind of push myself to do that second, third, and fourth layer of research. Find even better evidence. Find studies that compare different studies with one another, a meta-analysis we might call that, and just like really just like dive into a topic. I would kind of just like go home after school, just set aside 3 hours and just start reading, just going down the rabbit hole. So I kind of just like lived and slept and breathed debate 24/7. That's obviously not feasible for everyone, but just the most information and debate exposure you can kind of get into yourself at a time is like probably one of the best ways to learn. You can't really learn debate passively, just kind of going to one tournament or the other. It's really about what you're doing in between tournaments and really just putting your all into it.
That makes sense. I was gonna ask, yeah, like how did you have enough time for all of that, balancing it with like life and work and
Yeah.
stuff like that?
It definitely requires very strong time management. I mean, like I would just try to use my time during school and in between classes as effectively as possible. I would sometimes do a little bit of prep during class. No one should do that. Don't be a bad student. I might have done that a few times, but mainly I would try to use my time as effectively as possible. Make sure that when I'm getting home, I'm not kind of doom scrolling on TikTok for 3 hours instead of like doing something productive like my homework or debate research. It's really just about like finding time in your day when you're being very unproductive because I'm guessing most people watching this, myself included, spend a lot of time probably on Instagram Reels or TikTok doing something that like is not bringing us a lot of value into our lives. So kind of trading that and really like blocking out your time effectively is what really helped me be able to balance school and also just like inundating myself with debate.
Yeah, for sure. So that means you would consider all of this debate prep something valuable in your life.
Yes. Yeah. Very.
What do you think is the value of debate? Like why do it
Yeah.
all this much? Why push yourself to this extreme?
Yeah. I mean, I think like debate's probably like one of the best things you can do in high school to prepare yourself for college and just for work in general, whatever that might be for you. Um, I think like being able to be exposed, like even if it's just for a month or two, to so many different topic areas and just being able to build like really nuanced perspectives on like anything from foreign policy to domestic policy to legalizing drugs to a trade deal with Taiwan. Like there's just like there's a lot of value in being able to have like a deep base of knowledge on a lot of different issues. And it just generally helps with things like research and writing. I would not be the writer or researcher I am today if I had not done so much work in debate. And especially when you get to college, that's going to do like leaps and bounds for you. If you already have that really core skill set and foundation, you're going to do a lot better in all of your classes. So that's probably number one. Number two is confidence. Some people go into debate already very confident. I was not one of those people. And just like being able to like get all those reps of like speaking in front of other people, sharing your ideas, being more assertive with your voice compared to maybe being more passive before you join debate, that's going to help you. Just generally, like once you've done something really, really hard like debate, you kind of desensitize yourself to taking those risks in the future. So there's a lot of things that I do now in college that I probably wouldn't even thought about applying to or like trying out for if I had not taken that leap with debate. So it also just like generally changes your mindset in a really positive way that helps you find even more activities after you graduate.
Yeah, well said, well said. So I understand physically how you were capable of doing this with time management, but mentally, like how do you avoid the burnout that I'm sure a lot of people experience when they try to pursue this
Yeah.
extremely?
Yeah, burnout's really real. My senior year, first semester, I was really burnt out. There were a couple months where I just like could not find the motivation to do work. Um, I think sometimes just taking a step away is not a bad thing. People, you get this idea they just need to be on all the time, go, 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 go. And that's a recipe to get burnt out, and it's not sustainable in the long run. So I know I'm talking about like doing 3 hours of work for debate. That's not something you should be doing every single day. And it's not something that I did every single day. There were weekends where I say, hey, I need to take some time away from this. If I keep going and just have no time off, it's not sustainable. And in the long run, if you want to be doing the most work possible, if you want to be outworking your opponents, you have to know when to kind of take your foot off the pedal. So that's what I did. There would be times, maybe even a week or two of downtime where I'd say, hey, I need to just take a step back. And that means that for the next couple of months, you're really way more refreshed. You're really able to step back into it and kind of go at it really, really hard. So that's something that like that balance you need to know how to strike because in the long run, it's going to be better for you.
For sure. You said that a lot of your prep or like your learning experience involved
Yeah.
like watching videos and looking at resources online. I have two
Yeah.
quick questions here. One, any like favorite PF videos?
Favorite PF videos. I think it depends on like if it's tech or lay. If it's lay or flay, if your school has access to the final round archive for nationals, watching the national final rounds anywhere from I'd say like 2024 back to maybe like 2012. After that, it gets a little very different. I mean, like summary was like 2 minutes when you get way far back after like I don't know 2017. I'm not sure, but it changes a lot. So maybe back up to 2012 is a good thing to watch, like for a lot of traditional debates and see how people communicate and express their ideas. For tech rounds, I'm trying to think my favorite rounds. University KK versus Lake JS, Lake Finals 2019 is a great round to see kicking case and going for turns, just like an absolutely brilliant strategy. That's a round I like a lot. Any other ones that I like? Sunvite semis, Durham WS versus Charlotte Latin IS is a great round too. Just like a great summary from our fellow teammate Ani Ritsukeja. Just to kind of see how to be really clean and really clinical with your execution. Those are two rounds that I like a lot. But yeah.
That University versus Blake round. Oh my gosh. I remember I
Yeah.
wasn't there when it happened, but I was like texting people during it and they were freaking
Yeah.
out about the strategy. It
Yeah.
was crazy too. Didn't like I remember Blake read like something like six responses to the turn and they still like went for it. And then
Yep.
uh
Yeah.
Sai was just like line by line each response.
It's a fun round. It's a fun round to flow. It's very difficult to flow because it's just like you've got like an inch of space in your flow, and there's like six responses to that one response. It's crazy, but it's a great exercise.
Yeah, for sure. And then the second question I was going to ask you about this is like,
Yeah,
what are the resources that you recommend most to students who are trying to learn PF besides PF videos, I guess?
yeah. That's a good question. I don't know because I personally didn't use a ton of online resources. I mainly just watched rounds. I guess like I would recommend like to watch rounds effectively. Like there's a lot of things you can do. Like obviously flow rounds when you watch them. Redoing speeches from rounds that you're watching is a really good way to do that. Um, I know like, I wasn't a huge user of different online resources. I mainly just watch rounds, so I might not be the best person to ask for that. But like I think I would say effectively and like watching rounds and making the most of them by actually flowing them, trying to like redo parts of those rounds, giving speeches yourself, redoing your own speeches from tournaments. Those are the big things that I would recommend, but I personally didn't use too many of the online resources.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next question I have is, we now know a lot about your learning process. I want to learn a little bit
Yeah.
about like what came out of that as well. So for example, like were there any moments of like something clicked and it helped you understand debate much better? Or what were the primary lessons that came out of that initial wave of learning?
Yeah. Um, there was one specific round at the Yale tournament in 2022. It was a preliminary round where like at that point, me and my partner Veer at the time were trying to get better at like lay and flay debate, kind of being a lot of debaters can think that lay is very unpredictable and like hard to win compared to tech, which I don't think is true if you do it right. And we were kind of tweaking our strategy, kind of like changing it over time. And at the end of that round, the judge, after they disclosed, one of their pieces of feedback for us was that they felt like we were having a conversation with them. And that was like a really like kind of like light bulb moment where I was like, what most judges who are not technical are looking for is a team that's going to like talk with them and not at them. Because like a lot of teams approach lay rounds kind of like a slow technical round where they just kind of like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And they're not like actually contextualizing what they're saying, arguing like what things look like in reality. They're just kind of like throwing cards at the judge, which is like what I tell my students all the time is that you should imagine you're, at least for lay, obviously, you're imagine that you're having a conversation with your mom or your dad at the dinner table. How would you explain this argument to them? Or if you're comparing two studies, how would you explain why your study is better than a different study? Because if you approach around like you would just talking with anyone else, you're going to get a lot farther and judges are going to be a lot more receptive. And you're going to kind of get out of that really weird mindset of just like doing tech really slowly and just like going evidence, 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 like just checking things off a checklist, which is just like not how people communicate in reality. And it's strange that students kind of like go into debate and then like all their like traditional ideas of communication, which everyone has, kind of just like go out the window. It's like we go into this weird fantasy land of debate, and it shouldn't be that way. So for lay, that was a really big thing that clicked in my head. Um, for technical debate, I there wasn't like a specific point or like round that I can remember that really changed my view, but one of the big things that I took away when I was getting better at tech debate is that less is more. A lot of teams like to go for speed for the sake of speed, and there's nothing wrong with speed. But a lot of teams use it as a crutch to not improve their efficiency, their clarity, their ability to just, I think efficiency is the biggest thing, like word economy, things like that. They use speed as a way to just like not improve on any of those other things, which is not sustainable. So kind of learning how to like choose the right arguments, write the right arguments, and execute them effectively and going for a few things that are really solid rather than a lot of things which are kind of was like one of the big things that we realized over time that made us like very good flow debaters, even though me and my partners have never been like the best like speed wise debaters.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because I think that's one thing that I like have admired about your debate career is
Yeah,
you haven't fallen for the speed trap maybe as much as some other people
yeah,
have, or like relied on it as much.
yeah.
So let's maybe like investigate this a little bit. What do you think are the
Okay.
most important lessons that you learned with regards to choosing what to go for in these technical rounds?
Yeah. One of the really important lessons that we learned about like generally like collapsing and like choosing arguments effectively is to like kind of get out of the mindset of just like purely looking at defense. So like what a lot of teams do early on and what I did early on is I just look at my flow. I say, okay, what has the least amount of defense on it? That's obviously the easiest thing to go for, so let's go for it. And sure, that's going to save you time technically, but like the trade-off between saving time and actually like having a argument that effectively interacts with your opponents and sets up a strong weighing mechanism, that's not a good trade-off. Like we would find ourselves often going for arguments that we felt were like really strong and simple, like let's say an economy argument that creates jobs or GDP. But now we're going up against a nuclear war argument, and our weighing is not so good anymore because we kind of just chose like a really basic argument that like had a response or two on it, and then we went for it, and it wasn't a very good idea, like from a strategic perspective. So one of the things that we have learned is just generally when you're writing arguments, make sure that you're one, choosing your impacts really well. We would often build weighing into our arguments. On the student loans topic, um, we would have this politics argument about how I think it was something about how relieving all student loans would lead to some Republican victory. I don't remember exactly what it was, but we would work evidence in there about how that would lead to cuts in funding for public education, would also cause those schools to increase their tuition, which is like a direct turn to all the arguments for the affirmative. So we would work in those back half strategies into our case itself. So we would pick strong arguments that have that weighing mechanism from the beginning. We wouldn't just like choose a random argument and throw it in the constructive the day before the speech or the day before the tournament. We would spend a lot of time developing those arguments, knowing exactly what weighs the best, exactly what's going to interact the best with our opponents. So it's really just about picking and choosing your battles and making sure you're writing arguments that do give you those effective back half strategies, and also choosing to go for those arguments, even if they might not be the easiest from like a defense perspective.
Yeah, I think this is very good advice. It also like is the same in the I don't know what the word is, like the contrapositive, as in like you should also not be writing arguments that don't have this kind of effect on the back half
Yeah,
of the round. Like if you envision the round will always come down to like warming on the nuclear energy topic, don't be writing an argument on the neg that's like some random like tiny econ DA that is never
yeah,
going to outweigh warming, or it doesn't have like a story of how
exactly.
to
Yeah,
link in or something like that. Yeah,
yeah,
a lot of it is like strategic density and strategic efficiency that you can work into the early prep. Um,
yeah.
okay, next question I have is an interesting one, but I think it is actually quite related. How do you judge a debate? Like, who do you think
Yeah.
wins a debate and how?
Yeah. Yeah, I always like my judging philosophy is like it's undergoing a lot of change this year. It's my first year like actually doing judging. And sometimes I just like I start like second guessing my paradigm. I'm like, if I written my paradigm correctly, like am I actually reflecting my judging philosophy? Because it'd be kind of hard to capture that without in like a short amount of words in a paradigm without actually having a lot of experience. Generally, I mean, I look at it in a relatively normal technical way, I guess. Maybe it's a normal technical way of like a 2018 technical judge. I'm a little bit like slow from the technical side. So like, I don't know. I'm not like as tech as some teams now, but I generally just I look at the Wang first, see which team like where is the Wang being won and what impact does that point me to? I looked at that argument and then what I mean, I'm not going to go on too long of a rant about probability and defense and Wang. I generally think that Wang is a little bit overrated. Not to say that you shouldn't do it, but I think right now where PF is going, you just have like the team that tries to find the fastest time frame into extinction to get a short circuit against your opponents. And it seems like a lot of judges like have stopped caring as much about defense or like don't really believe in terminal defense, and they're like, oh, a 0.1% risk of the short circuit means I vote for it. I'm really big on like evaluating defense after I've determined a team has won the Wang. Like if I think they're winning like an infinitesimally small link into their argument, just because their argument is hypothetically more important because of the Wang, doesn't mean that I should vote for it. I don't do that analysis if teams don't make that analysis, but in my paradigm, it says I'm more than open for you to make that analysis. But I generally just, after I've done the Wang, look at the team that's winning a link into that Wang. If you have terminal defense on your argument, you can't just win because your argument happens to be hypothetically more important. But that's like my basic philosophy. I value like really solid extensions of arguments more than I think some judges. I've had some judges who judge me who like kind of let teams get away with like kind of messy extensions that don't really explain their argument fully. So like I'm a pretty big stickler for like you need to fully re-explain the warrant behind your argument very, very clearly, which some judges kind of don't do as much nowadays, but like that's my general philosophy. So I'm a little bit behind the current status quo of flow, I think, in that sense.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Dude, this time frame stuff that I don't
Yeah.
like I haven't actually been judging PF recently, so
Yeah.
I can't verify this for myself, but everyone who's gone out to like this battlefield of PF has come back
Yeah.
and said like, "Oh my gosh, everyone is doing this time frame extinction prereq strategy."
Yep.
To me,
Yeah.
it's like nonsense, especially if you use it in the way that you're talking about. Like I guess I kind of understand like extinction calculus to get rid of defense. Like that kind of
Yeah.
the mathematically or whatever. I don't really
Yeah.
understand why like the time frame component specifically allows you to like infinitely uplayer any other extinction scenario. It's like
It's just like if I had $1 for like every time a team said like we reach extinction first, the AF can't solve it, everyone's dead, then like I'd be a very rich man. Like every single
okay.
round is just like we can't do anything if we're all dead. Like that's just the meta now. And like I guess on a surface level, yeah, it's true. I just think teams should be doing a lot more work when it comes to like implicating their defense against Wang. Because it's kind of just like they get bogged down in the Wang, and then they just be like, okay, now our defense is this, that's good defense. All right, end of speech. Like you should be making the implication where it's like this is like terminal, this is near terminal, if not terminal defense. They cannot win their argument just because they're winning the Wang if they don't prove the argument triggers in the first place. That's something I think teams should do a lot more of that teams really aren't. Again, some judges just aren't conducive to that. Like they don't really value terminal defense, and like you obviously have to cater to your judge. If they don't believe that, that's not a good strategy. But you should try to know with paradigms like which judges, like me, for example, would be conducive to that kind of analysis. It is kind of an odd direction that it's going.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like I'm in a weird place right now because I'm one of those judges who does not like value terminal defense, I guess. And my
Yeah.
view is just like nothing is 100, nothing is zero.
Yeah.
But I still think that like the implication goes so far. It goes like near terminal
Yes.
defense is so different from just like 50% mitigation or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think people are not doing that enough. I was gonna say you said that like maybe on face value this time frame stuff like everyone dies first, then nothing else can happen makes sense. I'm not even sure that's true. Like I'm not even sure it does make
Okay.
on face value. My take is like the time frame aspect of the extinction scenarios seems like the least important component, given that like the math works out such that extinction is the impact, right? So you have this like infinite
Yeah.
magnitude. And then you have some amount of probability of getting to extinction. And the whole point of the framing is that this leverages the fact that you don't need a lot of probability to get there, right? Like
Yeah.
whatever, with 0.1% chance that this causes extinction. And then you have this like third component about time frame that's like my extinction scenario happens 20 years before your extinction scenario or something.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems to me that between the three of those, the probability component will have the biggest like comparative differences between extinction scenarios rather than the time frame component. Like it doesn't like who cares if
Yeah.
like extinction hypothetically could happen in 20 years versus hypothetically could happen in 10 years. If one of them is like a 1% chance and the other one is like a 2% chance, like I feel like you'd pick the
Yeah.
1% chance every time regardless of when it happens.
Yeah. I guess like no, I mean, it makes sense. Like I think like teams have kind of moved away from like well, at least the way that we would execute it like in my senior year, is that like the extinction analysis we would do is like completely divorced from magnitude. Like it has nothing to do with magnitude anymore. It's just that it's like on a solvency layer. Like any like if you run the risk of extinction happening before another extinction scenario, then they don't have any solvency at all because like we've died before we can address their later extinction scenario, and then you can kind of get into like intervening actors. But it is weird when you have like it makes sense if you have like a 100% extinction scenario. Obviously, you can't solve the other one if you are for sure all going to die. Um, but like it gets to a weird like intervening actors thing where it's like we take the risk to prevent the earlier extinction and that buys us time for the intervening actors to solve the other one. It's all strange and I hate it so much. I prefer just like a nice domestic policy or economic topic. But yeah, that's yeah.
100%. Is there such a thing as this magical 100% extinction scenario?
I guess if they just like cold concede your argument, like I'm personally tech to the point where it's like if your argument's not responded to, it's 100% probability. Like I believe that you should. I'm not going to make analysis for you. Like I'm not going to intervene. So like if you have a dropped argument or like a someone's extending through ink, they don't actually have a real response against your argument, and like yeah, that would be a 100% extinction scenario, even if in reality it like definitely isn't. So that's what I would think. That's what I think would be like a 100% extinction scenario.
Interesting. Can I convince you that probability weighing is real, even against conceded arguments? Maybe not.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I would be easier to convince than you might think. I do. I have a long rant about why I really like probability, but I'm interested to hear this.
So the take here is arguments have inherent probabilities that are maybe unknowable to some extent without like explanation in the round, right? But
Yeah.
for example, like you could imagine if I have a card in my case that says this guarantees a 10% chance of extinction, then now my argument starts at 10, right? Like you don't need to read defense against it to get it down to 10.
Yeah.
The defense would get it below 10. Um,
Yeah.
my argument is that even if I take that card out of the extinction scenario, that doesn't mean that my probability shoots up to 100 because I've now taken empirical evidence out. It
Yes. Yeah.
it still is some amount of probability. You just don't know what it is, but you know that it's between 0 and 100. My argument is that even in the absence of defense that drops the probability lower than it starts, you can still make comparative arguments between the probabilities of different scenarios by through a lot of different mechanisms. But the thesis is like your evidence does not say that this guarantees extinction. Your reasoning, your warrants do not explain why this guarantees extinction. The conclusion that this does guarantee extinction is like sort of absent from these arguments to begin with. And so it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to then later retroactively leverage that as if the argument originally was that this guarantees extinction.
It's kind of like there's like a near infinite amount of information about your argument that's like floating around in the ether, and like all of that combines into like the like inherent probability. We just like haven't really found it in the round.
Yeah, yeah.
But like how would you execute the probability weighing if like you don't have all that information? Like how do you make the argument like because it feels like vibes at that point where it's like our argument is just like vibey more probability. Like what does that look like in round?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the problem, right? Is like how do you
Yeah.
just separate it from intervention? I will say
Yeah.
first of all, we need to be comparative here. Like it is probably true that to some extent this is vibey, but my
Yeah.
view is that it's 100% intervention to assume that it's 100% probability because this is
Yeah.
literally just a lie that has not even been concluded in the first speech. And you're just sort of like, okay, like I will
And that makes sense.
like that seems like maximum intervention. But yeah, how do you do this without as much intervention? I think that there are a lot of different ways. One is defense, surely. Like defense is part of
Yeah.
that. You can do it without defense though, if you do things like compare empirics for different arguments. You can do things like for example, like my argument has happened every single year for the past 20 years. Your argument has never happened,
Yeah.
even though it ought to have happened. You can do it by comparing things like intervening actors. You can do it by comparing, um, I think lots of different factors play into this calculation. It depends also on the inherent qualities of the argument when it's first read. For example, like
Yeah.
an argument that gives a specific scenario might start with a higher probability than an argument that says this increases the chance of war around the world. Or like for example, you can
Yeah.
imagine a comparison between two arguments, one of which says this technology reduces the mutually assured destruction in all wars, which means that
Yeah.
like all of them have a higher probability. And the other argument says that like Russia is going to attack the Baltics, and this is going to trigger a miscalculation with the US, which triggers nuclear war. And both of these arguments are like very different in form for how they link into extinction. The first argument, you might be able to get probability weighing off of scope. As in, you might be able to say that we have, even if you have a chance of a war scenario in one scenario, we have a chance of war scenarios in all scenarios, which means that like mathematically there's just hundreds and hundreds of more chances for extinction that come out of our link. And so that's
Yeah.
one example of probability weighing. But then the other side could turn around and say, no, your link just says that there is some slight increase in the chance of war from all of these different scenarios. My link is like a near guarantee of war in this one scenario if I look
Yeah.
at links. And so that's a greater probability, even if neither of them are truly at a 100. So those are like all different ways that I think people should be comparing probabilities, even in the absence of defense that just aren't really happening.
Yeah. I think the idea of empirics is interesting because like you can almost think of an empiric as like the manifestation of all of that information that we like can't physically combine into a debate round. Because like an empiric is just like what physically happened in the world when we combine all the different factors that led to it in the first place. So I guess using an empiric is like almost like a proxy in a sense for like being able to access all that information without obviously reading all the information. So that's actually like, yeah, that's actually a pretty good point for like how you could do that probability weighing. One thing I will say is that a lot of teams, when they try to do that kind of like historical analysis or like probability weighing, a mistake I see so often in rounds is that people will try to compare the probability of a link versus an impact. So they'll be like, they'll say like their link about like, I don't know, some random nuclear war argument. I don't know what it is. Like the resolution triggering nuclear war is improbable, but climate change is happening right now, which is like two very different things. Because like what you have to be doing is comparing your link of do we solve climate change to their link of do they solve nuclear war, not do they solve nuclear war versus is your impact of climate change actively happening right now? That doesn't really tell you anything. And a lot of teams do that because like it's an easy thing to latch on to, like, oh, our impact is actively happening. It's probable. But you have to make sure that you're actually like properly comparing the same parts of your arguments, link to link or impact to impact. But yeah, it's like a mistake that a lot of teams that I watch do very often.
That is very, very good advice. I feel like that's one of the biggest things that trips people up about probability weighing is like it's very
Yeah,
obvious that it depends on the entire context of your argument. Whereas for other types of weighing, it's not so obvious. Like, for example,
yeah,
your argument is not just the impact, your argument is everything that leads to the impact, and all of those have their own probabilities. Every link, whatever, has like a certain like 99% or 1%, like whatever chance that it happens. And all
yeah,
the product of all of those links together is what your probability is, and that's what you compare. Um, I would even push this further and say that this is true for like other types of weighing as well, like magnitude is the
yeah,
obvious one. People just compare the magnitude of their like the concept of their terminal impact, but not the magnitude of the contextual argument. As in, like, for example, I see this all the time with warming scenarios. People will read an argument that's just like warming guarantees extinction or something, and then they
yeah.
like leverage the entire concept of global warming rather than how much of it is changed by their argument. Um,
Yes, yep,
Similarly, like this is also done with, I feel like almost every argument nowadays, it's the sort of like impact wars view of weighing. You know, at camp,
yeah,
like you get like an
yeah,
impact. This is nonsense because it's not contextual. It's like no one actually has
exactly,
an
yeah,
argument that says like we get to leverage the entire concept of nuclear war against
yep,
your
yep,
concept of climate change. Like, no, like it realistically, it's like a 1% increase in the chance of nuclear war between these specific actors because of this versus like a I don't know, like a zero point 0.1 degree increase in the like temperature in 10 years or something. And those
this
are
this is another gripe that I have is that like teams don't do I guess you could call it scope of solvency weighing. Like I think that's what I would call it. Where like yeah, like teams will be like we solve global warming, but their argument is like we phase it out like one brand of a Honda in the United States. Like clearly you're not accessing that extinction impact. And like and teams don't call it out. They're just like, oh no, they read extinction impacts. What are we gonna do? And I'm like you got to think about the argument. Like, yeah, contextualize the argument. Like, like how much of their impact is their link solving? Usually, it's not solving all of it, and like basically, I guess, yeah, comparing the magnitude of your link in a sense, like how much of your issue do you solve versus how much of their issue do they solve, is like really, really important. And teams just like kind of get into this like flow mindset where they're like, I wrote down the impact on the paper, so it must be true. Like you kind of like step back for a second. But yeah,
Yeah, this is make or break, I think. Like, not to call
yeah,
anyone out, but like there are some teams, Fairmont, for example, at the King Round Robin recently, read a
yeah,
position on the neg that was about like transmission wires between nuclear power plants and the grid. As in like,
yeah,
you know, these like big towers that like have the
yeah,
wire.
yeah,
So their argument was if we build more nuclear energy, we're going to have to set up more transmission towers. And so that will cause these like strips of deforestation. And then they read a card that said North American forest key to carbon sink. And then they read a card that says climate change causes extinction. Um, I feel like this is a very obvious example, right? Like you
yeah,
have this argument that literally says we're gonna build some wires that cut down some trees.
yeah.
And then like suddenly we're at climate change causes extinction. But if you do the math, like this is like
No,
zero
yeah,
point zero 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 0.0001% of all of the trees in America. Like
yeah,
it's how in the world is this sufficient to get any amount
yeah.
of impact, really?
Yeah, like and like that kind of like goes back to just like I guess it doesn't really it's not directly quality versus quantity, but just like generally people just get like really stuck in this like idea of flow where it's just like purely a chess match and it's just like all these like super technical moves that are completely divorced from any sort of like outside reasoning or context. And like that's not a good way to approach flow debate. Like technical judges like are still persuaded by logic, like beyond just like what pieces are you moving on the chessboard. And like when you actually do that contextual analysis for them, they're a lot more likely to understand your argument for one, but two, be more willing to vote for it. And like the more compelling you are, if you've got a really close round from like a pure hypothetical technical perspective, that's often the tiebreaker, even if the judge doesn't like consciously realize it. So like teams like need to be like just like zooming out and just like getting out of the block file for a little bit. What I tell a lot of teams also when they're first getting into technical debate is like when you're first like flowing a team's constructive, especially if it's like really, really fast, don't like have your head in a block file like while you're writing it and just like pasting stuff into your rebuttal doc as fast as possible. Like you just need to like think about like the general claims that are being made with the evidence and like how they lead to one another. Because like there's so many cases that I see where either the evidence is awful and doesn't say what they say it says, or there's just like a blatant like logical gap. Just like there's just like a jump between two arguments that is just like in no way substantiated. But if you have your head in a block file, you hear link and then you hear internal link and then you hear impact. You find a response to each of them, but you just ignore the fact that like as the name suggests, they are literally linked to one another. And the fact that there isn't a clear logical link between them means that they're not accessing part of their argument and just teams just like get lost. They like don't actually zoom out and just like think about it.
Yeah, this has been one of the most frustrating developments that I've seen in PF, both in terms of how debaters are engaging with it. Like, obviously, it's frustrating that people are doing this in the first place. It's further frustrating that people are not really pointing it out. But
Yeah.
also, I think it's frustrating that judges are like just totally willing to allow this to slide.
Yes.
Like, to what
Yeah.
extent does tabula rasa go too far? Like, honestly,
Yeah.
in my view, some of these arguments like require intervention to vote on, you know? Uh,
Yes.
like if it's incoherent enough, I don't know.
I mean, that's kind of a good way to put it because like I'm always a little scared as a judge, like as debate is moving more and more technical, I'm like, do I call out the fact that this impact card just doesn't say what it says at all and like intervene? Or do I just like ignore the fact that it doesn't say what it says? Which, like you said, is also just like the other side of the coin of intervention. Like I'm just like actively voting for like an unwarranted argument. I try to lean more towards like, no, I'm not going to vote for your like Iran proliferation scenario when like your card just doesn't even mention the word Iran proliferating ever. It's just like a bunch of random words combined together really quickly, and like we just believe the tag and move on. So like that's something I'm still working on with my judging philosophy. But yeah, I agree that like you kind of are just intervening the other way.
There are some instances I've seen on the wiki where like even the tags don't like logically string together to
Yeah,
form like a coherent argument.
exactly.
And I just
It's
wonder
like you're the one writing the tags.
like
Like you
what is
have full editorial control over this. Like why do they not logically connect?
right. It's really quite sad sometimes. I'll
Yeah,
give
it
you
is.
another example. I was doing a practice round against a team from Plano recently. And this is on the nuclear energy topic. I read a
Yeah.
neg that I called soul contention antimatter energy.
Oh
Um,
no.
no, it gets better. I read one card in the DA about antimatter energy that said it doesn't exist. And then every other card
Okay.
was just like stock, like renewables are good, and we there will be explosions and meltdowns from nuclear
Yeah.
reactors and all of that stuff. They spent like five responses answering antimatter energy because it was the tag of the position. The only
It's
card
like,
that it did not exist.
yeah. So yeah, wait. So the evidence just like completely like debunked itself, like or
Yeah.
like it was like
There was never an argument about antimatter to begin with. That was just the
yeah,
title of like the only evidence that was read was said that it was not an argument.
yeah, and like that. That's just like debaters just like get in their head when it comes to tech debate. Like I said, even with like lay debate, when like people's like communication styles just like change when they step into a debate round, just like the way that we like consume information also changes when we walk into a technical round. We just like take things on face value or just like think about things as like completely independent arguments from one another and don't just like think about them for a few more seconds beyond like diving into the block file. So like that's like my biggest piece of advice I think for tech is just to literally think about their arguments for like each argument, think about it for like 20 seconds max during crossfire, during your partner's constructive, whenever it might be, before you go into the block file. Like that's what I did, and that's what helped me like call out just like BS arguments. And like I think other teams should do that a lot more.
100%. Totally agree. So the other thing that you said when we were talking about judging was that
Yeah.
you're a bit of a stickler for extensions these days. I feel like this happens
Hmm.
a lot for first year outs. Like I was such a stickler
Yeah.
for extensions when I was first judging. My question though is why? Like why do extensions even really matter that much?
Yeah. It's a great question. I don't even know if I have a real reason why they matter. It's just like what I did, which I guess I'm violating my own advice of actually thinking about the logic behind things because there's technically not a reason. Um, I guess I think extensions are a way to kind of like keep tech debate grounded, where like it's kind of a limiting factor on how much you can read and the quality of things you can read. I think if there weren't extensions, we would things would just be generally less clear, and you would be able to just like go for like a huge amount of stuff without like I think you wouldn't be able to follow a tech round without extensions because like actually, yeah. Here's my answer. I think extensions are like really key to like the communicative aspect of tech debate. Like it's a way to like make clear to the people who are listening to you, your judges, like what are you going for and like what argument are you making? Because if you didn't extend any arguments or you didn't even extend responses, like I don't even know what that kind of round would look like. It would feel like a blur of just like maybe card names and like maybe some numbers thrown in there. So I think it's a way to keep debate grounded and like especially technical debate grounded. I'm a stickler for like really in-depth extensions just because like I really, like I've said throughout the interview, I value the logic of arguments very, very deeply. And I think like fully re-explaining every warrant of your argument again keeps your debate grounded in logic, even if like the arguments might be a little strange in reality. Like there's been rounds, like I've judged final rounds of specific tournaments. I'm not going to name names where like my ballot has like come down to like, did you extend your argument? And like, can I explain your argument back to me? Like if I can't explain a team's argument back to me, they have like failed in their job of communication. And I don't think that like responsibility for a debater just goes out the window because you're in a technical round. I think if we let debate go in that area, sure, you might get really good at like playing a hypothetical chess match, but you're not getting any real skills from that you're going to use afterwards. I think there's a balance you can strike between the values of really fast-paced technical debate while keeping it grounded, and I think extensions is kind of one little piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, you've convinced me. I think
Yeah,
extensions are probably necessary. Um,
yeah,
I guess my question though, this is one thing that I struggled with when I was judging, is
yeah,
like, what is the line between like enough that is extended versus not? Because it seems like the judging of this really
yeah,
requires a bit of a binary of thinking. Like,
yeah. That's also a good question. I mean, it's like there's no like clear bright line, I guess, to use debate terminology for it. Like the bare minimum for me is that like every like logical claim that you have made that is like I guess a necessary assumption for your argument to be true has to be in your extension. It has to have like a solid-ish reason for it. Like you don't need to like give me an essay in your extension, obviously. Like I'm not, that's just going to waste time. But like every necessary assumption for your argument to be true has to be in your extension. It has to have like a reason to it. The more contested that reason is, the more you're going to have to explain it either in the extension or during your just frontlining generally. But like the bare minimum is all necessary assumptions. They have quick reason given to them. That's the best I can give. It's obviously a little more, it's kind of ethereal what that actually means. Like when does the warrant become real and like enough? And I can't give a clear answer on that, and no one probably can, but I mean it just kind of vibes almost.
yeah, I mean, that's fair. I was gonna ask you, sort of poking into that a little bit, like, what's the
Yeah.
difference between a necessary assumption and a reason? Like the
Um,
claim of a necessary assumption, like this
yeah,
is true versus the reason behind it.
yeah, I'm kind of using necessary assumption as like kind of like the claim you're making. So it's almost like a claim evidence reasoning framework, and it might give people horrific flashbacks to whatever science classes they're taking right now in high school. But it's just like each necessary assumption for your argument is whatever claim you're making, be it Trump will do X, Y, Z, or nuclear will create, or like nuclear will solve this issue. Um, but and then like the warrant behind it is like I guess like the reasoning behind it. For this topic, it's kind of weird because a lot of your claims are like it's a kind of more of a sciencey argument. I guess a better example might be like for like a trade topic, like trade creates jobs is your like necessary claim to get to your impact. There needs to be some sort of warrant behind that by opening markets or like increasing access to trade, which improves demand, which means more workers have to be employed, like that kind of thing. So your claim is just like the raw argument you're making, and then the warrant would be like obviously the reason behind it. It's not always super cut and dry. They kind of start to mush into each other on certain topics like nuclear, but that's kind of how I would think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I'm asking you a very strange question here. What is the
Okay.
difference between a claim and a warrant? Like this is not just like
Yeah.
really what is the difference, but like I don't know that there is one.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, yeah, they can kind of start to mush into each other. Um, I think a claim is like that's a great question, actually. It is a weird question I've never fully thought about. Like, I guess like I don't want to say a claim is an argument you make about the world because that's like a really kind of dumb, obvious answer. Um, yeah, I don't like. I mean, I don't want to say a claim is an argument. That's just like synonyms for each other.
I guess
Um,
like my problem here is when I think about this, I think that there's some level of arbitrariness to what is considered an argument with a claim and what is considered warranting for that argument based on the contextual, like based on the context of the topic that we're debating and the context of the
yeah,
round. Like, for example, one thought experiment is like if we take a singular warrant that is in an argument and then we make that warrant the topic then clearly you wouldn't say that that's a warrant anymore. If that was the topic, then now you would have to,
yeah,
like, then you would have an entire, like, infinity of
yeah.
other arguments within it. Uh,
That's what I was thinking. Because with the trade example, like if the claim is trade makes jobs and the warrant is that it's because it opens markets and increases demand, that's just another claim. And then you have to warrant that claim. It is kind of like a weird like infinity where just like I don't know what it reduces to.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if there is a difference between a claim and a warrant. The more I think about it, it's like,
there's a
oh
name
yeah,
in philosophy called infinitism that I've been
yeah,
investigating a little bit recently. And yeah, it seems like the answer is just like that there isn't like a an end to it. All
yeah,
claims are warrants, every conclusion is a premise for another conclusion and requires its own premises.
yeah. Like I guess maybe I don't want to say a warrant for debate is like once you reduce it to like just like a concrete action that's being taken. I guess you could say trade creates jobs because it opens markets because when tariffs are reduced, costs go down because like the tariff is just like no longer there. I guess the closest you can get to something that's kind of just like given in the context of the round, that might be the bright line for when you've warranted enough. Like if there's something that's just I don't think any team is going to get up there and say like the removal of a tariff means that there's no longer a tax on the import. That's just like what a tariff is. Obviously, like you could still go even smaller and smaller. I guess maybe like almost what is given could be like a way to define when you've done your proper warranting, but that doesn't really hold for like a foreign policy topic where you're doing like actor analysis because there's like nothing that's actually given in that context. So yeah, I mean, I think it obviously varies between topics, but that's like one way I could do it for like an economic topic. But yeah, it's a good question.
Hmm. Then, okay, the combination of all of this leads me to the final question about extensions, which is like,
Yeah.
given that it seems somewhat arbitrary, what is the difference between a warrant and a claim? Given also that you will determine the round on whether or not you think something is a warrant or a claim, how is this not like arbitrary intervention?
They're really good questions. Um, yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, I think. I mean, I guess I would just like go off of like, I don't want to say the norm of debate for what is a warrant, because again, that's just completely arbitrary. I mean, for me, it's almost just like what makes me convinced of your argument, but again, that's arbitrary. It's just like when does it make sense in my brain? I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it does just come down to just like generally arbitrarily, like where, at what point can I explain an argument to myself, and when does it make sense to me? When would most people understand it with the given information that, well, I guess that doesn't hold for a lot of really squirrely technical arguments, but like most debaters or judges would understand with the information they're given, what the argument means and why it happens. But again, that is kind of not a clear answer at all. I think it's the best I'm gonna be able to create though.
I actually think it is a very clear answer. I think it's probably
Yeah,
like the only answer that could exist for anyone. Um,
probably, yeah.
but when I was thinking about this, like this is when I started really having some existential crises about like the
Yeah.
validity of technical debate as like an objective
Yep.
craft, as like a science rather than an art. I
Yeah.
so much of it eventually, if you really like peel it apart, it eventually comes down to, at least to some extent, an appeal to just the norms of the circuit at the time.
Yeah.
Like I will vote for this because other people do. Not entirely, right? Like there's some internal logic to it that constrains that as well. But I think so much of technical debate in reality, if you unmask it, is just like I'm gonna judge how other people judge.
Yeah, I mean, like if you transplanted like a 2017 technical debater into now, and you like made them, let's say you control for speaking times and you make them talk faster, they probably wouldn't pick up a lot of ballots because like at least from some of the rounds I've watched, it seemed like when you had like 2 minute summaries, there was like more kind of sticky defense where like defense would not be fully extended in summary, but that was the norm because summary was shorter. And like if you moved them into now debate and made them speak a little faster, they'd probably lose a whole lot of rounds because they're just like not appealing properly to like what is just like understood as good technical debate. So I think it is kind of just an art that's just like constantly changing. There's no real like objective sense that you can kind of like pin down when it comes to tech debate.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you for the revelations about technical
Yeah,
debate. I'm
of
gonna pivot
course.
the conversation a little bit now, and then we will afterwards get into some nuclear energy stuff.
Yeah,
So the next conversation I want to have, maybe you can take it away from me a little bit, but what are your biggest hot takes in debate in the current day and age?
yeah. Hmm. I think I've kind of hinted at some of my hot takes. One of mine is like generally that teams should either like slow down and expand way more on their implications and contextualizations, or just like really start choosing like the highest quality arguments over quantity. It feels like a lot of teams are like we should go for as much stuff as possible just to like overwhelm our opponents, which it's a strategy that works. And it often worked against me. I was not the fastest debater, and if I was not right on my A game in a round and I got a huge amount of stuff dumped onto my like second rebuttal, let's say, sometimes I would crack under the pressure. So like it's obviously a thing that works. I just think that teams would be served well if they went for less arguments and used their speed to like implicate that argument more, contextualize it more, and give better comparative analysis. Because like one really strong argument that's just like weighed so well against another argument, like it's like impossible to beat if you choose the right argument and explain it properly and do the proper analysis. I had teammates who like when they had like a massive rebuttal dumped on them. I think it was my teammates Caleb Chen and Jack Vale at Glenbrooks in 2024. A team dumped like a massive rebuttal on them with the intent of like, let's just overwhelm them. They took a step back. They're like, let's kick case and go for turns. And they like they effectively conceded certain responses that like just like very slowly in Jack's rebuttal that like just dismantled the opponent's argument entirely and like set them up with like really strong turns that were weighed very well, kind of like the uni KK round and Blake JS round. Um, like they did all that and they set it up and they went for a few arguments really well and kind of just like did the better logical approach rather than matching that speed, and that worked really well for them. And it seems like a lot of debaters are kind of losing that. Um, a hot take for Lay and Flay. I don't know whether it be considered a hot take, but it's just like to please get off the dock, like for the love of God. I like if I had one piece of advice for like a new debater who's like, your first tournament is tomorrow, is to just like outside of prep time when you go up to the podium or when you stand up in the middle of the room, your laptop should be nowhere near you. And I don't know if that's a hot take because like I think it's kind of a hot take because most everyone uses their laptop in lay and flight and tech rounds. It makes sense in tech rounds. Um, but it's just like I think it's just a horrible crutch that like really like I think it's part of what kind of is ruining people's like idea of communication, and especially in lay and play rounds, like that idea earlier I was talking about, where you kind of step into a lay round or step into a debate round and all concepts of how you talk to people are just thrown out the window. It's because that laptop kind of encourages you to just like work off a checklist. What response am I reading from the block file? What pre-written stuff am I going to read? When in reality, every single debate round is going to be incredibly different from one another. The way they explain their argument is going to be different, even if it's the same contention technically. And being able to, one, actively adapt how you explain responses depending on how they have worded their argument is really important. If they've like, especially in lay rounds, if their narrative is different, like if one team is reading like an American dream narrative and the other team is reading like some sort of innovation narrative, you can tailor the language you use in your responses to more effectively interact with their narrative. Another thing is like just looking at the judge when you're speaking to them when you're not using paper. You can actively change how you explain things depending on their reactions. There have been many, many times where I'm mid explaining an argument and the judge is looking at me like I'm speaking a different language. And I'm like, okay, I should probably be explaining this differently or putting my eggs in a different basket. And that's not something you can do when you're just beholden to whatever you wrote a week before the tournament that's on your laptop. So if you're a new debater, I would just recommend, just from the bottom of my heart, do not use your laptop in a speech. Your future self will thank you, and you'll pick up a lot more ballots. But those are my main hot takes for tech and lay.
100%. I completely agree with these. What do you think are the best ways to practice the second one? Like, I think a lot of debaters
Yeah,
get scared, like,
yeah. I mean, it's scary. I think, the way that I made the transition from using a laptop just by going through past rebuttals, converting. I try to save my rebuttals on my laptop for tech rounds, but I also did that for the lay rounds I used to use my laptop for, and I would convert those onto paper and re-give those rebuttals. I remember very vividly. I was just like standing in the middle of my kitchen one summer. It was leading into, I think it was like August or so before school started, and I was just like giving the same couple of rebuttals off of paper over and over and over again until I could effectively do it. Um, yeah, the practice is going to be your best friend. It's going to be very scary early on, but especially if you're a new debater, your tournament's going to be really scary either way. And I think making that investment and kind of like front loading all of that fear really early on, you'll get more confident very, very quickly. And you kind of get it over with. But it really just comes down to reps. Either go through old rebuttals and start trying to convert them to paper, and then practice them on your own. Like I said, watch online rounds and then try to give those rebuttals off of paper. Probably go for like a Nats round maybe, or some of the kind of rare lay rounds that are recorded online. It's probably not the best idea to use a tech round to do that. But it comes down to practice.
yeah, 100%. I think that that's all super good advice. I also had some vivid memories of like standing in some rooms in my house and just like giving the same
Yeah.
rebuttal off of paper over and over and over and over and over again.
Yep.
I really think that like that stuff helps more than it even seems like it does.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it can feel like you're going insane, just sort of like standing there repeating the same speech over and
Yep.
over and over again. It's like,
Yeah.
how is this going to help me when the topic completely changes, when I'm not giving the same arguments
Yeah.
again? But it really
I
does.
mean,
Like that thought process that goes into it, I think is huge.
Yeah, I would even do that kind of stuff in my car. That was probably the craziest thing I ever did. Like I'd just be driving somewhere, either to school or to a restaurant, and I'm just like, I want to re-give that final focus from 2023 Nationals because that round stung for a while. Losing in the final was not fun. And so I would just be like, all right, let's give that final. I would just start while driving, just like trying to go through my head, re-giving that speech. Like that kind of practice, like when you kind of get to that point where like you are just like constantly immersing yourself in debate, that's like you will inevitably get better. And when you're just constantly thinking in that way and doing those reps over and over and over again, things are going to get easier and they're going to get better over time. You look crazy driving on the road, just like talking to no one. And some people probably thought it was kind of odd, but it was very much worth it.
I almost debated from the driver's seat one time in like an
Yeah.
online practice round, but I
Oh
was
no.
convinced not to.
That sounds like a good idea, a pretty safe idea not to.
Yeah, don't do that. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think that like what that simulates is these kinds of no flow like practice speeches as well when you're
Yeah.
just like doing it from memory. That stuff is also underrated. Like I
Yeah.
feel like that trains your brain in such a good way to be not so reliant on really anything, not even paper.
Yeah. It helps to train your short-term memory. If you're practicing way harder than you actually play, like giving those speeches like without a flow, like that's actually a great thing that I didn't do that too much besides my strange car ride endeavors. But like if actually in practice, every once in a while, do a no flow round, try to keep all of that together in your brain and effectively use it. It's gonna be really difficult and it might end up really badly, but like that's gonna train you to the point where when you actually have a flow in front of you, you don't have to look down as often. You don't have to like instead of reading you're reading with your face in a laptop, instead of switching that out for reading with your face and paper, you have your paper kind of down here, you're looking at the judge, you're kind of just glancing at it when you need to. Like practicing in a way that's like more difficult than you play is definitely something that's very, very good that I probably didn't do enough.
For sure. Last question about debate before nuclear
Yeah.
energy. This is an interesting question. How do you think PFers should adapt to the increasing importation of norms from policy and LD?
Yeah. That's a great question because I think near the end of my career, I was kind of falling behind on that front. I was never like the best tech debater on my team. I had good tech success at TOC. Um, but yeah, like that's one of the regrets I have is that I did not keep up with tech debate as much as I should have. I probably would be getting wiped right now by a lot of current tech debaters. I think I think practicing speed, number one, is really, really important. Like when I say that debaters should go for quality over quantity, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should give up all your speed. I'm more so saying you should use your speed more effectively instead of going for tons of arguments. Use that speed to win certain arguments more strongly. Um, I guess keeping up with speed and doing that practice is really, really important because if you cannot keep up in a speed sense in these hyper technical rounds, you're almost always going to fall behind. Um, Keeping up with yeah, technical norms from policy and like LD. I think watching rounds that are recorded is definitely good. It's always good to emulate what the top teams do, the ones that are at the forefront of importing those ideas in the first place. You also need to just like adapt your practice strategy or your team strategy or coaching strategy. Like if you are a team that's been generally focusing on traditional technical debate, you can't just be like, oh, this case stuff is weird or this like new I don't know. I haven't been keeping up with policy or LD, but whatever new strat they are bringing in from over there, you can't be like, oh, that's weird. I don't want to think about that because like that's not going to do anything valid or beneficial for you. You need to be devoting a little bit of your time to having a practice round, that kind of stuff every once in a while. Watching a video with your team together of one of those rounds and talking about what are they doing, developing some sort of back file or just general like A2 theory toolkit. We kind of had those things in our back file, so we were ready for when those things came up. Like you can't just close your eyes and pretend it's not there because it's just not going to end well. But yeah,
Yeah, 100%. I maybe have slightly different takes on this as well. So maybe there's a
okay.
discussion to be had here.
Yeah,
I feel like as I get older, I get more conservative about this kind of stuff. Like
yeah,
more in the sense of like maybe it's not such a great thing to bring in all of these norms and like necessarily mimic
yeah,
them perfectly. Maybe this is not necessarily like conservative about this because I my position is pretty simple. It's just like we shouldn't copy exactly the same things that people are doing in other events just because we
yeah,
think those are other events are cool. Um, but my opinion is it's totally possible to beat speed without speed. Uh,
yeah. I
Maybe
agree.
this is a hot
Yeah,
take. I think that what you need to train is not necessarily speed. Like, I guess, listen, you're
okay.
right. Training speed will help you.
Yeah,
My opinion is that training efficiency will help you much more.
yep.
Like,
Yeah,
if,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, like I agree. This is something that Michael Hansen I've already mentioned before. Great guy. That's something that he was really, really big on as well. Is that that's also one of the reasons that I think him and Alex were like such a good technical team. Is that obviously they could go fast. I know you're not saying that speed isn't important. And like they practiced speed and they were able to go really quickly, but like I almost never saw them go full speed ever because like they would go against teams that would just be blazing fast. And it was like it was magical almost to watch them go through those technical rounds at like maybe like 70% of the opponent's speed, maybe even half the speed. But they were just like so clinical with their execution, so efficient with how they responded to things, extended things, got implications down quickly. They did essentially like the bare minimum of what they had to do. They didn't start spinning in circles. They were just really, really quick moving from one point to another, but getting all the important information down. I would actually probably agree with you that like you should train efficiency and value it more than speed. Obviously, the best of both worlds is just to train them both. But like the most efficient debaters are the ones who win basically every single round. And I agree. You can probably beat a technical team that's going incredibly fast at maybe like 60% of their speed, 70% of their speed if you are efficient. And like the best teams that I think that win tournaments like the TOC, like Michael and Alex, are the ones that have that just like insane efficiency. That's just like I think at the time they were on the circuit, just unrivaled by anyone else.
yeah, 100%. If you want to train efficiency, if you're watching this, you should. I think some of the best drills to do it are like try to respond to an absolute dump as slowly as possible or in less time. Like one
Yeah,
of the drills that I remember I used to do was I would simulate like the first few speeches of a round by doing like case, 8 minute rebuttal, and then just trying to defend the case against the 8 minute rebuttal.
yeah,
Like 4 minutes, maybe even in 2 minutes. Like if you do like asymmetric time drills like that, where you really devote your all to each speech, and one of them is like an absolute dump, like read like
Yeah.
50 responses on your case, and then try to beat them, try to like cover as much as you can in 1 minute. Um,
Yeah.
that will teach you so much about efficiency. Because
Yeah.
it's like I think people on the circuit on average these days are like 10 times less efficient than they could be.
Yeah.
Getting
I agree. Like one of the best efficiency drills, in my opinion, it's actually something we did with you at 2022 nationals with extensions. I think we call them ladder drills, what we call them. Like we did with extensions, obviously, but it's good to do it with a rebuttal also. Is like have like a someone dump a rebuttal on your case, respond to it in 4 minutes at whatever speed you need to. Just do the same response in 3 minutes, but you cannot get faster. 2 minutes and 30, you're not allowed to get faster. 2 minutes, you can't get faster. You'll get to a point where it feels like physically impossible. And there probably does come a point where it's just like physically not possible. But like constraining yourself speed wise, having someone else there with you to call you out when you get faster, because sometimes you don't notice when you get faster, is a really good way to just like force yourself to like only give the explanations and the implications that are absolutely necessary. Don't spin in circles, do the minimum amount of warranting possible and move on. Like that kind of drill is really, really effective.
Yeah, it's huge. I feel like that's got to be one of the most important takeaways from this interview.
Yeah.
Okay, next, it's time. Let's talk about the April PF topic about investing
Yeah.
in domestic nuclear energy. So,
Yeah.
first question I have for you, if you're sitting down to prep this topic for the first time, pretending you're like a competitor, what is your approach to prepping it?
Yeah. Um, Obviously depends on the tournament you're going to. So I almost always start with lay and fillet prep before I go into tech because I think that once you have that general idea of the topic and you've read a lot of articles, you can sort of start to piece together those kind of techier arguments. It's a little hard to just like summon a technical like argument into your mind, like just like comes to you in a dream. Like they're very very like complex often the link chains, and like it's a lot easier to do once you've actually like read through a topic and you have a lot of articles to pull from. So I usually start with lay and flay. Um, my approach to those kind of topics is what I did leading into 2023 nationals and 2024 nationals is I would try not to focus on like writing arguments initially. I would just do a lot of reading, a lot of reading. I would cut things that I thought were interesting, not for any particular reason. I would just kind of cut them, put them in a file somewhere, um, and just kind of like soak in all of the possible information on the topic. Because once you kind of have that really good baseline knowledge and like you have a lot of different information, a lot of different perspectives, you can kind of distill that very effectively into convincing narratives. I would not recommend just like finding some sort of argument, being like, oh, cost of nuclear, it's expensive. And then just cut that and then just like throw it into a doc, read it at a tournament. Like pigeonholing yourself and only doing prep which you think like helps your arguments is like not a good way to go about it, especially in lay and flay debate. You're not going to be as widely knowledgeable about the topic and you're not going to know what the kind of compelling narrative is. So like doing that really broad research first kind of allows you to create that overarching narrative, get that story down, which for lay and flay is really, really important. Um, Knowing just how to make the general big picture comparisons between the AF and the neg. Like, what does an AF world look like? What does a neg world look like? Why might one be better than the other? That happens when you do that really general research first. Um, for technical debate, I not it's kind of hard to explain how we approached making technical arguments. I mean, we would again try to choose the arguments that have the best back half implications and the best back half weighing and strategy generally. You don't want to just like find the really like a really like basic impact and just kind of go with it. You need to like specifically focus your energy on those arguments which you think are important, which you're going to kind of figure that out once you've done that really general research first. But yeah, that's my basic advice for that.
That makes sense. To get even more specific, um, I like this like reading everything first stuff, but
Yeah.
what are your first few Google searches like? Like, do you just put in like nuclear energy and then just read?
I, like I kind of try to find the most like ideological voices on a topic. That sounds kind of weird. But I'm like I'll look up things like nuclear energy is like a historical failure or nuclear energy is a history of failure. You'll like for neg obviously. You'll kind of run into articles that like give these really long, flowy introductions where they're like, we invested this into XYZ project, then this, and they all failed for X reason. That kind of helps you find those really broad articles, which like those are usually written by experts in the field who probably are going to have done way more reading than you can possibly do in a month-long period. And like when you find those really like strongly opinionated articles, they're going to have these really beneficial comparisons to be made and these really beneficial narratives, which kind of helps you just figure out, okay, what's the general vibe? What am I kind of looking for? Why, what specifically about nuclear being bad or good should I be tapping into? And once you kind of have that idea, then start focusing in more. Like if it's something about how like nuclear is bad because I don't know, something like you're consistently running into people who have really strong opinions about construction time and how construction time implicates to climate change solvency or energy independent solvency, then you start focusing on those arguments more because you know that they're if you can find all those arguments and you can combine them under maybe a narrative about time frame, a narrative about immediacy and the need to find solutions quickly. Like finding the people who have really strong opinions can kind of help point you in the right direction early on. That's kind of what I do. But yeah,
That makes sense. I like this focus on history as well. Like piecing together all of these
yes,
historical examples is huge. What was
yeah.
it? Vote with history, vote for the con. Your last.
Yep, that was the last ever words I said in the debate round. Yeah, a lot of teams have used that in the past. I think Danny or Daniel Segal, I think that's how you say his name, Lincoln Sudbury debater. He ended his focus speech with that in his final round, or something similar to that. I think he said history signs your bow for the con, something like that. That's not why I said that, but that was probably somewhere in the back of my brain that was there, which might have sparked me to say that. But like a historical focus, especially for land flay debate, is really, really important. Like it's just like naturally something that people find convincing from all walks of life, whether they're technical debaters or lay parents or just lay people generally. Um, People like certainty and they like when things are historically back because it kind of gives them something to latch onto in debate rounds, which can often be very complex and hard to follow. So that's like a really good baseline thing to kind of build your narratives on.
For sure. So let's talk more specifically about this topic then. So after you've done this cool like historical research and you've done a lot of reading, which I'm sure you've done actually a little bit since you were prepping for states.
Yeah.
What is like your first survey take of the topic? Like which side do you think is better? What are the arguments do you think are the most popular, etc.?
Yeah. I tend to think neg is better, specifically from a lay and flay perspective. I've had a little bit of technical exposure, but not a ton given the like Tar Heel Forensics League pool generally. Um, I think it's very hard in a lay sense to get out of this idea that nuclear takes a long time to build, and that like that kind of dooms it to solve a lot of these issues. I think it's hard to argue things like, oh, we need energy independence right now because Trump's tariffs are really ruining our relationship with our oil importers. How is that going to help the Trump administration if this reactor might not be online for 12 years when Trump is long gone by that point? Um, that's a tough hill to climb. I know that there's evidence out there. There's arguments about like deregulation that could make things be built faster by like speeding up the permitting process. Whether or not you can connect deregulation to a topic about funding is a different question. Like, does the resolution allow for that to be like fiated is a different question. But generally, on first look, from a lay and flay perspective, I think those time frame arguments are very difficult to respond to. There's also a lot of benefits to the affirmative, though. I think a lot of negatives to this kind of like trade-off disadvantage where it's like you don't invest as much in renewables. I think you can find reasons why you can invest in both. There's a lot of good evidence out there about how it's unlikely we're going to cut a lot of these tax incentives when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act. Trump's trying to legally, he probably can't do that without congressional authorization. And there's a lot of obviously a lot of Democrats, but also a good handful of Republicans who benefit from those kind of subsidies a lot when it comes to investment in their states, and they're not going to be willing to cut it. And that investment's already set in stone. And renewables alone probably can't provide the proper power at all times of the year and at all times of the day to fully transition the United States. You need something to go with it, and nuclear is a really good, as a lot of evidence says, baseload option that can create constant power production that can basically fill in the gaps. There's a really good quote one of my students had in their round where they were responding to the fact that the opponents were like 50% of our energy is going to come from renewables by I don't know 2030 something. And he was like the question you should ask yourself is what is the other 50% going to be? Is it going to be fossil fuels on our current track if you vote for the negative, or is it going to be an effective long-term solution like nuclear that gives that proper load? So I think if you can win that the two things can happen in like renewables and nuclear can happen together, then AF is absolutely stronger because there's no point in not investing in both. But it just depends on whether you can win that trade-off argument. That's kind of the really core lay focus, I think, and what most rounds come down to in those kind of debates.
That makes sense. I'm thinking about this time frame argument. It's definitely intriguing. I
Yeah,
mean, I think it is maybe so difficult to beat that maybe trying to beat it is not the right strategy. Like
I
I
agree.
know the evidence you're talking about probably. There's a million different types of reactors, and like some of them are supposed to come on within like 2 years, but some of them are supposed to come on in like 10 to 20 years, and maybe
Yeah,
China's doing something that speeds them up, but that might not be done in the US. Regardless, like if you look at history, every single reactor in the US has been like at least twice as long as it was promised or something.
yeah.
And so, difficult argument to beat. I wonder then, do you think there's room on the AF to just admit that, to just be like, yes, things that are important take time?
Yeah, I think, yeah, like th this is another thing I think about debate generally is that debaters should be more comfortable with concessions because concessions can create credibility. You don't want to be dying on a hill that you just simply cannot win. It doesn't look good. And I think getting up there and being like, yeah, nuclear does take a really long time to build. We agree. We're not going to try to beat around the bush and try to find a way to say that it doesn't. And but there's narratives that you can kind of there's ways to explain arguments that make those long-term investments seem more rational. Just because something takes a long time doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, like good things come to those who wait. That's one good line. One line we would use on other topics is a short-term solution to a long-term problem creates a long-term disaster. If we just look only in the short term and purely invest in things like renewables, in the long run, that's not going to be able to fully sustain ourselves, and it's not a smart decision. It will lead to a long-term energy disaster where we just are always reliant on a certain pretty large amount of fossil fuels. So there's ways to kind of spin that and be like, long-term investments are important. Like there's nothing inherently bad about something taking a long time to happen if it's going to give us really good long-term benefits. So it's all about like how you spin that to your favor. And just like making that strategic concession because you will look like a more well-rounded, more nuanced like argument maker if you do that.
This is a tangent, but one of the things I
Yeah.
love about Durham specifically, and I have fond memories of Welty helping us with this, is like the focus on
Yeah.
one-liners is so the bumper stickers, so good.
Yep.
Can
Yep.
you walk me through like what is the process on the team of coming up with these things?
Yeah. It's kind of it's strange because like some of the best like one-liners we've ever had just like they just like come to you just randomly. Like I won't say in a dream. I've never had someone come to me in a dream. It would have been kind of cool, but I haven't. It's just like I'm kind of just like thinking, I'm sitting there, I'm like, how do I really encapsulate this entire argument together? Like if there's one thing I want the judge to think about, what should that be? And it takes a lot of thinking, but it kind of like it sort of just like arrives to you at some point. The short-term solution to a long-term problem creates a long-term disaster is like one of my favorite bumper sticker lines of all time. We used it really only for our organic agriculture topic. It's like conventional agriculture might be good now, but in the future, it's not. It's going to kind of fail. It's going to erode soil. Agricultural yields will not grow as fast as population growth. That kind of thing. It's kind of similar to renewables, where it's like renewables are really good. They're great. They're having a massive explosion right now, like in growth and investment, but they just physically don't have the consistent energy output to be our sole source of energy. So it's kind of a similar situation to the organic agriculture thing. Um, and like if there's one thing I would just want to say to a judge when they're trying to consider the how to look at the round at the end of the round once all the speeches are over, it's just that like we like can't only look at the short term. There might be really strong benefits now, but like we are like mortgaging our long-term energy security by purely focusing on the short term. And the snappy way that we found to phrase that was short-term solution, long-term problem, long-term disaster. It takes time, it takes practice to be able to come up with those one-liners, but like it's basically just what is the one idea that you think is the most important thing that a judge should be considering to themselves when they're filling out their ballot. You always want to be thinking about the judge, how you're communicating to them, and like what idea they're taking away from your speech.
Yeah, 100%. Let's transition a little bit to maybe more of the technical parts of this topic. So a lot of the people who are watching this are probably prepping for the TOC, which is like, as far
Yeah,
as I'm aware, the next major tournament in April. What do you expect to be the most common positions in the TOC to be watching for?
yeah. Um, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not gonna be the best source of information on this because most of my prep has been on the more lay and flay side. Um, Generally, from my experience, I think the most common positions are going to be something that links into nuclear war, like usual. You're going to probably have a lot of like nuclear proliferation arguments, something about U.S. energy dominance and how that links to global hegemony. Teams are going to be kind of rushing to find those big extinction impacts. I think for the same reason that teams want extinction impacts, you're going to have like the general climate advantages and disadvantages as well that try to link to extinction. And I think there's like with like scope of solvency we were talking about earlier, you do get like a decent scope of solvency with nuclear or renewables trade-off, whichever side of the coin you're on. So like those are like the kind of basic, most general arguments I think are going to be really, really big. Just because of the fact that like the debate community is moving more and more towards extinction impacts. But I would kind of struggle to get into like really specific arguments because I haven't had a lot of exposure to flow debate.
That makes sense. That said, I think that people underestimate the extent to which there are certainly lay judges at TOC as well.
But
Like,
yeah, that is true. Yeah. I
I
mean,
remember,
yeah, like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you go ahead, go ahead. No,
Okay,
all
I
you.
was just gonna say, I remember like going to TOC for the first time and getting like I think 4 out of 7 of the prelims were like lay judges. I was like,
Yeah.
I thought this was supposed to be the TOC. What's
I
happening?
know, like there have been times that like I was gonna say this earlier is that like a lot of teams think that like oh I want to be a good technical debater, I want to go to these round robins, I want to win the TOC. A huge amount of that comes from being good at lay and flay. Like I've been to tournaments like Emory and like me and my teammates have gotten like at least 60% lay judges. Like it's just like usually easier for or it's often easier for teams to bring parents with them compared to having tons of technical coaches because that can cost a lot of money to hire. And like you will not get far enough to be very good at technical debate if you do not have that lay and flay foundation. So like don't neglect that moving into a tournament like the TOC and just moving forward in your careers in general. If you want to be getting to those late out rounds, if you want to be getting out of preliminary rounds of tournaments, you like have to be good at lay and flay debate. It's not something you can neglect just because you like tech debate better.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, a few other things for nuclear energy specifically. What do you think are the best ways to deal with this narrative on the pro about like the world is burning, we have to do something different? Do you think it's just like renewables are solving now?
Yeah, I think it's generally renewables are solving now. I think you can also, if you have good evidence about climate tipping points, that can be something good to throw in there. I think again, like the neg has to be leveraging time frame where it's like, yeah, the world is on fire and the world is burning, and we have like maybe 10 years to really get on track to fix that. And if the first dent in that problem is happening 15 years from now, like really not the right solution you're looking for, like not at all. And like any risk that that kind of investment is derailing a like tried and true solution that has been helping to decrease emissions and is rapidly being deployed is just not a good idea. So you do, I think as a negative, you have to have that alternative, and it really has to be renewables. There's not really any way around that because if you're conceding that the world is burning, that's not a very good position to be in on the negative, seeing as you are defending the status quo.
Yeah, 100%. So, seems like you really like this like renewables timeframe combo on the neg. So, I
Yes.
want to push back on it a little bit and see how you will defend it.
Okay.
So one of the responses that I've thought of against this renewables argument is not necessarily that it is wrong. Like maybe it's true that nuclear energy will push out renewables to some extent. But it's probably also true that nuclear energy, for the same reasons, will push out some fossil fuels. And so the argument is just like both nuclear energy and renewables are basically good because of what they aren't, right? They're not good because of what they are, except for maybe like one comes quicker, whatever. But regardless,
Yeah.
the reason that that's important is because it gets rid of fossil fuels quicker. So the argument is even if there's a risk that we reduce renewables to some extent with the increase in nuclear energy, if there's also a risk that we reduce fossil fuels, the fossil fuels are the main problem. And so it should be okay that we get rid of a little bit of renewables to get rid of a little bit of fossil fuels as well.
Yeah.
Like that would be a trade that we're willing to take.
Okay. I think one of the ways that I would approach responding to that is that um, like obviously we do a lot of things like oil mining like expansions and like the creation of new fossil fuels but like one of the realities is that like a lot of the fossil fuel infrastructure we have is like already set in stone, like we have done that investment, those things exist already. um And like clearly we still open new coal plants from time to time, but like the solid base of fossil fuel is already well established. We kind of just like keep extending the contracts on those like on those plants or extending their lifetimes. Um, when you have a massive investment like nuclear, comparatively, I think it takes far more from renewables than it would take from fossil fuels, seeing as renewables are like still in the process of being deployed, whereas a lot of fossil fuel capacity and investment is already like set in stone and like not very reversible when it comes to nuclear energy. So like that's number one. It's going to take more comparatively from renewables than it would fossil fuels. Um, Two, I think looking into Trump administration policies is important. It's a little bit fishy and kind of not fishy. It's a little bit murky right now. Um, what Trump can really do when it comes to guiding the domestic political agenda, because a lot of the push for renewables kind of just comes from market forces. Like it's not purely like a does Trump say yes or no kind of thing. Um, but if teams can find good arguments for why Trump is like really pushing to make fossil fuel expansion comparatively easier than renewable energy expansion, then like when we invest in nuclear energy more, if generally it's now easier to keep fossil fuels and it's a lot easier to get rid of renewables, they're kind of losing their market superiority from having kind of government preference. That would make it more likely that we cut renewables than fossil fuels. So I think the big things is look at the political climate, cut good responses, and find good reasons why Trump would make it easier to cut renewables than it would to be to cut fossil fuels. And two, the fact that fossil fuels are so entrenched already, it's just naturally easier to kill off projects for renewables than to like decommission a coal plant, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have one last question for you. And I think you
Okay.
might, the instinct might be to say, oh, I'm the wrong person to ask.
Yeah.
But I think you'll have a very unique perspective about this. I want to ask you about critiques in public forum
Okay.
debate.
Yeah.
Maybe specifically critiques on this topic. I don't really know that much about them, but more so
Yeah.
like, how do you deal with people running Ks on you in PF?
Yeah. I've never run a K, but I have certainly debated a lot of K rounds. Um, One interesting thing is that like the vast majority of the K rounds I've debated have been in front of lay and flay panels, which is really strange. I don't know why teams continue to do that. Um, some teams do it as kind of like more of like a protest and to like create discourse, which can certainly work. And you can, I guess, technically win certain Ks on lay panels. Like teams like Iowa City West have done that, and I've debated them on lay rounds when it comes to Ks. I have had a few flow K rounds though. I think generally I'll start with lay first. If you do run into a weird lay K round, it's not very common, but it does happen. Um, is again sort of zoom out, have a conversation with the judge. Don't try to go for like a fully like don't just like read topicality and then layify it later. Like kind of go through the implications and contextualize what does topicality mean in just like a broader perspective. Like talk about fairness generally, appeal to what a judge would want to hear about why debate is fair. Don't get bogged down in the technical details. But that's probably not when you're going to hear okay. In a technical round, I think really like drilling the basic response strategies is always good. Things like topicality, you need to know how to effectively execute that. If you're going to a tournament where you know teams are going to be reading non-topical Ks, you should be drilling that kind of argument. Um, for a topic like nuclear, where you're probably going to have some sort of like maybe set call Ks when it comes to uranium mining. I know there's some military industrial complex Ks probably when it comes to proliferation and just nuclear technology in general. You have to be aware that those Ks do exist. You have to know what teams are reading them, and you should be preparing really early on in the tournaments. Because if you're expecting to get to out rounds and you expect those teams to be breaking, you should be preparing those responses to those Ks really, really early rather than figuring that out in the 30 minutes leading up into a round. When I was at TOC, we knew that there was a team we were likely going to hit that was reading. It was a non-topical identity K in this scenario, but we were working on that from the moment we finished out rounds to the morning leading up to our quarterfinals round where we actually had that round. And the more time you can give yourself, the better, because the advantage that K teams have is that they tend to understand the literature more than you do, because they've read into it more. And I'm guessing most of y'all aren't just like reading set call and MIC literature for fun. Um, but when you give yourself more time, you level the playing field significantly. And a lot of Ks just like generally like don't have very good methods. They don't like their alts are kind of like very vague and don't effectively solve what they're talking about. Um, And like there's generally like certain plan inclusive counter plans you can run that are very, very effective, but that only works when you are preparing a lot early on and not just in the 30 minutes leading up into a round. Because if you're not comfortable with a K, you're not gonna be able to get comfortable in those 30 minutes and it's probably not gonna end well. So like the biggest thing is start that preparation really, really early on. Um, and like when you actually have that time to look through the logic of their K, just like the logic of any other argument, there's often times where there are mismatches between their method and their solvency and the actual like problem they're pointing out. And those are really good things to focus on beyond just like basic backfile responses that you find.
Yeah, 100%. I'm actually curious about that round, the quarterfinals round at the
Yeah.
TOC. What was the preparation like? Like what, like specifically as well, like what were the positions that you were preparing against this identity K? Because I think this is
Yeah.
like something that's very common now.
Yeah. We were preparing against it was I don't know if it was queer rage or queer optimism, but it was a LGBTQ related identity K that we were debating. We were debating Princeton, forget the team code. Ishan Banerjee and it was Princeton BM. Princeton BM. Very good team, very good K. It was a really interesting K to watch because they had like spliced together like different music to like match with like what they were reading and like the music would change to emphasize parts. It was a really cool K. Um, but we approached that one from the basic perspective of topicality. Like that was our first thought, get the topicality done, really get the essentials there. But we also wanted to get creative with our positions. So I mean we would first also like generally prep out their method, find the logical contradictions in their method. They had certain standards about survival tactics and like how their K is good because it promotes survival tactics. But like the way that their K was being read, like it basically just like framed out anyone else's survival tactics. Like if you were also a member of the queer community, like the way their K was set up is that you would just kind of assume that the survival tactics of their K is the correct one, and their method didn't really allow for the proper like analysis of like breaking clash between how do we have survival tactic versus survival tactic debate? How do you break the clash on whose experience is more important? Like those kind of like broader methodological questions about how their K works and like the discussions it creates are really, really important. You don't want to just get bogged down in like topicality good, non-topicality bad. You can have really, really good, valuable responses when you like do that kind of method comparison and figure out like what logically about their method doesn't work when it comes to discourse. Um, we also explored some kind of creative off-case positions, or I guess they're kind of like disadvantages. I don't really, yeah, disadvantages. They weren't like that team specifically wasn't citing author names, and they were also making certain alterations to some of the poetry they were citing. So we tried to find other theory positions to read based on that about how one, like it's an evidence ethics question for starters, but two, it's also a like idea of like you're kind of stripping people's identity away and kind of like reducing them just like purely to like the suffering that they're talking about in their literature, which is like not, which also is like not a good method to be communicating to the debate community. We didn't end up going for that argument, but like those kind of like broader discussions about what is their K doing and why is it not actually creating proper discourse is a good way to approach those arguments rather than just trying to do the topicality debate because they've probably prepped that topicality debate a lot better than you have because that's their central strategy. You have to kind of switch it up and find those broader problems with their method that other teams probably haven't ran against them yet.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Well, those are all the
Yeah.
questions that I have for you about nuclear energy. Do you have any last wisdom to dispense to our audience about debate?
I'll just generally point to what I think the most important things I've said over the past hour are um, get off the dock when you're a new debater. That's the biggest thing. If you take away anything from this talk that we've had, it's that's one of the best long-term decisions you can make. But generally, like you need to just like people need to just not forget that debate is fundamentally a communication event. We kind of lose sight of that a lot. We think about it as like an adversarial like evidence clash event when like some of it is that obviously, but fundamentally it comes down to who's the better communicator and who can connect with people more more clearly and more just like genuinely at the end of the day, especially for lay and flay rounds. And whoever can do that kind of communication the most effectively and really like connect and explain with their judges on a human level is the one that's going to probably walk away winning that round. So you need to start putting yourself in the context of you're having a conversation with your judge. Like I will never forget that RFD I got because that was like the light bulb that flicked that I think made me a really, really great lay and flay debater. And also, again, like I've said throughout this talk right now, it extends to technical debate as well. But you just have to remember the debate is a communication event. Imagine that you're having that conversation with your mom or your dad in most any round you debate in, and it's going to do leaps and bounds for you.
Thank you so much for all of this. Okay.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course.
see you, everyone.